Well, folks, as promised, we have a very special guest with us today, John Podlaski. John is a highly accomplished writer of several books, including some Amazon bestsellers, and that is an incredible achievement to stand out in a worldwide audience like that. John also spent 50 years in the automotive industry, but most importantly, especially to our audience, John is a veteran, specifically a Vietnam veteran, having served with the 25th and the 501st Infantry Brigade of the 101st Airborne, and a fellow Wolfhound, I might add. John, thank you for joining us. And as I try to do for all Vietnam vets, welcome home.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's good to be here.
Yes, this is a big honor and treat for me specifically. So I definitely want to get into your writing, of course, but would you mind taking a step back and telling our audience of the events and the environment that surrounded you joining the Army? Could you give us that backstory?
Well, I was 18 years old, and again, working in automotive, we were very busy. I was working 7 days a week, and I was also going to school and taking a full load, 12 credit hours. So I was working till 3, 4 in the morning, and then I had an 8 o'clock in the morning class. So that went on about 3 or 4 months, and I had to make a decision. Either do I continue on with school, or do I continue on with the money? And I dropped out of school, and it wasn't long afterwards that Uncle Sam found me.
Sure. So drafted and maybe tell our audience a little bit of the training that started. What was the initial phase of that for you? What was the initial adjustment like?
It was one of those that you asked yourself, my God, what did I get myself into here? Going into the service and being introduced to the drill instructors and going through the training with and them making promises to you that, hey, you're all infantry, you're all going to go to Vietnam, and you're all going to die. So that was pretty much pushed into our head all through basic and advanced infantry training. So everybody expected to go to Vietnam and be shot at, die while you're there. So we expected it.
Yeah, it's certainly not what the recruiters would want to say in the peacetime, right? So, jeez. And through your service time, was there anything? I mean, it's hard to, and of course, your books cover some of these things. I don't want to spoil the books, but let our audience read those. But was there a particular lesson, or maybe a leader, or maybe something, just a life lesson that just got picked up during that service time that's still kind of carried forward into your civilian life? I should say into your veteran life.
I would think so. That I tried to delay my going over to Vietnam, and in between training sessions, I was asked if I wanted to take a 2-week course called leadership training. Not so much to be a drill instructor or anything like that, but they taught you the fundamentals of leading. And one thing stuck out in my head was that you can't lead people unless you agree to do whatever you tell them to do. So, you're going to lead by example and not sit at a desk and go ahead and dictate to your followers what you want them to do. And after the service, when I went into the service, there was a law in place where the business had to save your respective job for your return. So I was a regular production employee when I left. And when I came back afterwards, I won't call it resume, but my letters of commendation and so on that I got from my captains and lieutenants while I was over in Vietnam shined highly in their eyes, and I was offered a supervisor's position right off the jump.
Hmm.
So it was from that point on as a shift supervisor, and when that particular factory was bought out by a competitor, I was moved to another or eventually got a job somewhere else, but it progressed to the point where when I retired 50 years later, I was managing plants
Wow.
and either doing startups, shutdowns, or financial turnarounds. And it all stems back to that training I did in the Army, that had I not learned that particular lesson at that time, I wouldn't have known it when, afterwards and gone to that extreme. But that's what started my management career.
Wow, that's incredible. That's fantastic. It's great. And then so you got home, you went into well, you went back to automotives. What was the catalyst, or what was the time frame of when all of a sudden you realized you wanted to start writing and putting some of your experiences down on paper? Could you talk about how that came about and maybe what your first writings were?
Well, when I met my wife, she was pro-veteran, her whole family, mother, father, they were all members of the VFW and such.
Hmm.
And I was accepted in high regard by the family. And yeah, tell us about it and so on, but it was pretty much homogenized everything that I had told them, all the good things that I remember, or wouldn't get into any of the gritty details. But my mother had saved every letter that I wrote home from Vietnam. And it was about 3 years after the fact. We were sitting there and on a Sunday after dinner, and she brought out the box of letters. And she says, here, you might want to go through this. And my wife was just full of questions. Well, explain this, explain that, talk a little bit about this and that. And what I ended up doing was taking the letters home. She had them separated by questions, and here, write the questions down and give me the answers and so on. Make it readable so that we can understand it. So I sat down. I had an electric typewriter at the time, and I started writing all these things. And it got to the point where her questions were more detailed and, well, tell me about the surrounding, tell me about the
Wow.
animals, tell me about, other things. So one thing led to another, and it's, you should write a book. Just take everything that you had wrote and put it all together. So I started on that. And it was a first person draft that I started working on. And it took me about 2 years to type out 250 pages.
Sure.
And once we started getting into the editing, it was quite difficult at the time because unlike a computer today, if I wanted to change a word or a sentence, I had to retype the entire chapter.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I had a 3-foot high pile of papers in the corner of the room where of all of my rewrites and such. So I got to the point where I had it all done finally, and I submitted it to a contest in Washington State University, and it was called Manuscripts Unlimited. And surprisingly, I got a honorable mention out of that. And so I started shopping it around. At that time, Mrs. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's wife, was working in New York as editor for one of the publishers. I started sending letters all over and got all these rejection letters and such. And I finally found a publisher down in Atlanta, a former vet. And he said, hey, this is a pretty good story, but instead of telling it in the first person, you need to tell it in the third person. And the third person, if you're not familiar with it, is a person that's up in the clouds describing everything that's taking place down below.
Yeah.
So going from a first person to a third person was kind of difficult. So fortunately, at that time, when and the first book was titled "The Ingenuous Soldier." Ingenuous being a word for naive, ignorant, doesn't really know the rules. And this publisher suggested I change the name to Cherries, because Cherries makes a little bit more sense. A lot of people referred to the newbies in Vietnam as cherries.
Right.
And I started to make the change. Now, at that time, this was in the early 1980s. Atari came out with with their games, they had a word processor program. It would hold each 5-inch floppy disk would hold
I forgot all about that. Oh
would
yeah.
hold approximately a chapter or so. But it was my first computer, and I got to go ahead and make whatever changes I wanted and so on. So that worked out pretty well. I got the book done, which doubled in length, and again started shopping it around. And I had at that time it was my during the transfer and going back, stepping back a little bit, I finished the draft, but it got to the point where, there's still some work that needs to be done. But hey, this has been my life for the last 10 years. I'm tired of it. I really don't want to do it anymore. And I packed everything up and I put it in the garage. Now I had the draft copy available, and it was at my 25th high school reunion. I went to Catholic school, so there was only like 70 kids in a whole graduating class. And I took about 20 copies of this and passed it around. So I hadn't gone to the next 2 or 3 reunions. So at the 40th reunion, I was asked, hey, well, what happened with that book that you wrote? It was a great thing. I never did see it out, and so on, etc. Well, I got tired of it, don't want to do it anymore. You're crazy. It's a hell of a story. You got to tell your story. We'll help you.
Wow.
No, I'm okay with that. So for me to do anything else at that point, I had all this stuff that's been sitting up in the garage for 10 years. And actually longer than that, almost 20 years. And it was, well, the Atari, they don't sell the ink for it anymore, and I really can't do what I need to do. And I had a computer at the time. So let's see what it would cost to convert these Atari discs into Microsoft Word so I can use it on a computer. And it was unreal what the cost was going to be.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
So finally, my daughter says, let me sit down and I'll type out both versions and put them both into a memory stick. It took her about 6 weeks or so, but she wrote the first one and she wrote the third person draft, gave them to me on a stick, and she says, okay, have at it. And one of the girls in my class was an editor, and she agreed to take it on and do all the editing, the line editing, and this and that. And when she was done, the book became a little bit more powerful. And at that time, it was Amazon allowed you to self-publish. You didn't need a person in traditional publishing to go ahead and do your story. So I self-published that book, and this was in 2010. I finally finished it. So everybody at my school got a copy, and so on. I was the last graduating class of that school before they shut it down. So we continued our reunions and such, and we went on. And that book has done quite well in the last 12 years. Then I went ahead and wrote a couple offshoots of that book. Things went into a little bit more detail and created 2 other books. And then there's short stories that I had published as well. Two of them are not about Vietnam, but about something that happened in my life early on. So that's how I became a writer.
Yeah. Oh, that is a beautiful story. I like how the key details there, of course, is you had people in your life that kind of nudged you a little bit and supported you. And that's a huge blessing, of course. So that's beautiful. And I forgot all about the Atari Atari floppies. And nowadays these kids don't think nothing of the technology. They just assume it's always been like this. They can just think something and it types up, right?
Oh, we got a 4-year-old granddaughter that takes us in circles on her cell phones. Oh yeah.
Oh, I bet. I bet. Well, this is really remarkable. So nowadays, how do you spend your days now? I notice you're involved in quite a few different groups. Could you share with us a little bit there? And
Well, I've got the normal social media, Facebook and Twitter, and I also go on to the Facebook groups that I have. But I manage a website, and I put it together after my Cherries book was published, and I was going to use it primarily as a platform to go ahead and answer questions and work along the book kind of thing. And it evolved from that point to writing articles about the Vietnam War and the warriors themselves, because a lot of people, the feedback that I was getting from the book was that, and more so coming from the kids and the spouses, was that, hey, my husband, my father never talked about what went on over there. But my God, after we read the book and asked him questions, he was amazed how I was able to put in print his thoughts. And a lot of the feedback I got was, hey, this could be my story. And it got to the point where Iraq was and Afghanistan were taking place, and I got feedback from those vets as well, excuse me, that, hey, take away the snakes and the spiders and, add camels and scorpions, and you're telling my story, so really nothing has changed in 30 years, between Vietnam and the way the wars are fought today. So I started collecting articles and movies and videos and songs of the 60s and 70s. And I put all that together on a website, and I try to publish an article at least once a week. I've had my 5 millionth hit a couple of weeks ago.
congratulations.
Well, it's kind of tough to do.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's
I'm averaging about 2,000 hits a day
wow.
on the website. I've got over 500 articles, all kinds of pictures. I put a slideshow together with my personal pictures so that anybody that read Cherries could then go to the website, watch this carousel, and sort of see the picture of the words they read, the places I'd been and so on and so forth. So that's pretty much my life now. I mentioned I got a 4-year-old. My daughter's a single parent. So when she's working, we have the kid, every day, 8-10 hours a day. And a 4-year-old, God, she keeps us busy. So whatever time I have left over, I'll dedicate over to the website. But then I also put ads together and put them all on social media, trying to sell my books, and going on from there. Cherries is, like I say, in 12 years, has done very well.
Yeah, and I met you through LinkedIn, but the book I saw first that you published is titled "When Can I Stop Running?" And that was, again, I served overseas, and that was impactful to me as well. Like you said, there's so many. Your writing style is so personal and detailed that I would say most veterans can have an association with exactly what you were describing. And I'll tell you, I kind of got lost a little bit in the comments when I went on to I believe it was just Amazon, the comments of folks that had purchased your books, because you have like these incredible ratings, as I'm sure you're aware of. And just like you just referenced, there are plenty of veterans that have commented to you publicly, thousands and thousands of people that, thanking you, talking about how that became um, a way for them to think about their service time, talk to their family about their service time, potentially for the first time ever. So I hope you recognize how much how many people you're touching out there, and how many folks like myself are grateful for you sharing your stories with that perspective. And it's really powerful. And I don't want to miss any titles. I know that I'm familiar with you. Please tell me what I'm missing here. I just want to, for our audience sake, When Can I Stop Running? Cherries, those are both top sellers. You also have Unwelcomed, Unhinged, and Death of a Triangle. I also saw a short book out there with the date 2/27/70. Is it something you want to explain? And is there any other writings that I missed on that list? And I apologize if I did.
Well, no, you got them all.
Okay.
The When Can I Start Running was my second book, and it was about myself and another friend who had to go out 200 yards outside of the fire base and spend the night monitoring the area, looking for the enemies coming through and so on. When and being in the jungle at night and only being able to see your hand a foot or so in front of your face, everything else was lent to your imagination peaking. And you would see a shadow, and all of a sudden that was an enemy soldier. You'd hear a little crash, and again, there was another enemy soldier. And to spend the night was just terrifying. And in that particular book, which again, I said earlier, is a detailed event or a detailed night that is drawn out of the book, also includes snippets that correlate to maybe that particular hour of when I was growing up, and things that scared me or things that I did when I was young. For instance, a 5-year-old going into the basement at night by herself. That scared the bejesus out of a lot of kids.
Right.
Walking past the cemetery or even going through a cemetery at night. Those kind of things. And if you got scared, you ran like hell. Well, in the military, they're supposed to train you to stand and fight. And if you do run, you could get killed.
Right.
So that's how that book went out. There were certain events that occurred during the course of the night that were notorious, so to speak, and we were ribbed by the rest of the soldiers back in the fire base when we came back. Death in a Triangle now is the very next day after the end of When Can I Stop Running?
Okay.
So it's like part 2. And we were tasked to go back out and assess what had happened that night before. There was an ambush. There was some mortars attacking the fire base. In fact, my partner and I had a group of 25 enemy soldiers sit down and take a lunch break not more than 10 feet away from us.
Wow.
And, if we would have been recognized, well, we'd have been massacred at the time. So, and you couldn't get up and run, again, the same thing would happen. So Death in a Triangle carries on the next day. Unwelcome is an event that occurred when I got home from Vietnam. We had a burglar. A burglar had attempted to break into the house while I was still in Vietnam, and no weapons in the house. My father had a ball-peen hammer, which then deterred the break-in. And when I got home 2 weeks later, an attempted break-in occurred again. And here I am, home fresh from the war, and I engage in a shootout with these burglars. Unhinged is just a story where two 14-year-old kids go to a drive-in theater, help clean up during the day to be able to sit up front, eat as much popcorn, drink as much pop as they want, and watch a movie. Well, lo and behold, that movie was the first time it showed, but it was Night of the Living Dead. And that's the first time zombies came out and so on. Now, these two kids, after the movie and hearing windows roll up and women screaming behind them all night, had to walk a mile to go home. And this was at midnight.
Sure.
So again, your imagination and things along that line. Cherries, going back to it, reflects an 18-year-old kid that goes to Vietnam, unaware, naive, definitely ignored by those veterans that have been there for a while, because all cherries, when they come in country, were considered liability.
Yeah.
So you didn't want to get close to them. They could cause you to get hurt and so on. Well, you watch this 18-year-old and all the events that he had witnessed and gone through over his 12 months to become a leader and a warrior during his last month in country, where he then was responsible for taking out a brand new lieutenant out on patrol, and then going against his wishes because he was trying to apply what he learned in ROTC against practical knowledge. And I had the backing of my captain, and I was able to convince this lieutenant to do things my way, which actually saved the platoon.
Yeah.
So that's all my books.
Yeah, it's John, it's just so incredible. And to share it in the details and the way you write is just, it's powerful. It's like it's like the reader is almost what you described earlier is how you described a third person reading. It's like the reader is watching this unfold. It's like they're right there with you. So very powerful writing, very powerful stories. I do have one more question, but before that, I want to make sure that our audience gets the name of the website that you maintain. Would you mind saying that clearly? And I'll make sure there's a link as well below.
It's Cherries Writer, WRITER.com.
Okay, cherrieswriter.com. Okay, thank you so much, John.
Let me bring up one more thing that.
Oh, please, yes, please.
Prior to going into the service, when I got drafted, was kind of a how can I say this? It was the most frightening thing to occur to my family. My father was in the university in Poland when World War II broke out. And when it was evident that the Germans would attack Poland, the government shut all the schools, took everybody, and made them soldiers. So my dad became, he had a master's degree at the time, and they promoted him to a captain of a cavalry outfit. And he has pictures with this beautiful horse, and he's got a 4-foot-long saber sword and so on. Well, when the tanks came and Germany invaded, they attacked or counterattacked on horseback. And it took 3 weeks for Germany to overrun Poland. My dad ended up in a POW camp from 1939 September until the end of the war in 1945, when the Americans liberated the camp. He was wounded twice, and that's when he was in the POW camps. So the Germans were notorious for taking the POWs out for a ride in a truck, stopping in a meadow, letting them go out, and then open up with a machine gun, and do things like that. My mother had a farm near the POW camp, and she used to sneak my dad food through the wire, apples and things of that nature. And it wasn't long after the war they got together, and I was born in Munich, Germany. Now I found out when my mother died 3 years ago, she had dementia, but she had come out and was telling things at night. And we discovered as a family that she was sneaking Jews out of Germany.
Oh.
So the Gestapo and that were looking for her. At any given time, she had 3 or 4 Jews with her, and she smuggled them out into France or Spain or any of the other places. And that was something, Jesus, I wish I'd have known that, when she was still living, so that we could quiz her and so on. So my going into the military at that point, my dad was very patriotic, even coming to America and getting citizenship. And he was proud that I was going to go as supporting the government, but he was scared as hell that something was going to happen to me.
Yeah, that's
because he lost his father and 2 brothers in the war, plus, other relatives. Same thing with my mother. She lost her first husband and a couple sisters in the war. So for me to go to war, this was going to be a tragic event for them. So when I finally came home at the end, it was a hell of a celebration, for both mentally for them and physically that I had come home. So I wanted to throw that in as a point of interest.
Oh, of course. I'm so glad you shared that. That's a beautiful, I mean, that's mind blowing. It's a beautiful thing that his sacrifice, what she did to save and help him and other people, and then here you come out of another blessing, and then now you're helping people as well. It's such a legacy of love, really. And I'm glad that you didn't leave this all in the attic or the garage. I'm glad that I'm so glad that you brought it out. And oh, I'm so grateful for this time, John. And that's just a wonderful story. I always like to ask one final question, because I've asked this question of hundreds of people and I never get the same answer twice. So if there was a way for you to somehow give your younger self just a sentence or two, just some type of message before you join the army, something you kind of wish you knew, or maybe not wish you knew, but just advice or what have you, what would be the message now after this incredible life you lived? What's the message to younger John before he raised his hand and took the oath?
Buckle up. It's going to be a hell of a ride.
Yeah, you got that right. I love it. I love it.
I have to admit, though, that before going into the service, I was, as I said, 18 years old, working in a factory, but they had a bowling league that started at 11 o'clock in the morning. I worked the afternoon shift, and it was every Friday. 18, too young to drink, but yet at the bowling alley, everybody drank. So by the time it came to go to work, I didn't want to go to work. So I was to the point of maybe losing my job because of my attendance. And one thing about going back or going through the military, I grew up. both mentally and physically, but more so I became more responsible, and something that maybe would not have occurred, and had I not gone into the service, God knows what my life would have been like. I surely wouldn't have been in a leadership position. But it's just one of those things that happen. I got to be thankful that at least I went in and got that education, because it made me who I am today.
Yeah. Well said, sir. Well said. Well, folks, this has been a fantastic interview. This again is John Podlaski, Vietnam veteran and acclaimed author of several books and writings. Please support his website, check out his books, maybe buy some for some gifts, and keep this message going. His website is Cherries Writers. Excuse me, John, I might have misspoke. The name of the website again? I'm sorry.
cherrieswriter.com.
Thank
So
you.
no S after writers.
Yeah, I apologize. I thought I might have misspoke. So please check that out and support him. So John, thank you so much, and I really appreciate the time, and keep up the good works. And I'll be reading, and hopefully our audience will listen and be reading as well.
Thank you very much for the time. I had a fun time.
Thank you.